Okay, we're going to continue with Cave 4. This is the second part, so you can watch the first part if you'd like. Here we're dealing with Ksav Ivri, a different script for Hebrew. If you get the time period right, you'll be able to match it up. If not, the letters in Ksav Ivri are not so different. It's so close to Chumash. When I was doing it, even though I didn't find the correct resource, although I did later find one that was more accurate to this Ksav to match them up letter by letter, you can probably work it out pretty easily as I did. It's not so different, and because it's so close to Chumash, everything lines up so well that once you get a few letters, you'll be able to, and common words like Moshe, right, it really helps. Anyway, going through, you'll see I write the word on top, right, so Rabim, Haim, right, so this is just looking up these few words, you can figure out it's the beginning of Shmais, the second chapter, and it's talking about that they were having hard work, V'yizak, right, they screamed, or rather, he screamed. It's singular. It should be v'yizaku, right? There should be this extra vav plural. Instead, it's singular. This is not such a big mistake. Why? Because the Jewish people are sometimes written in the singular. So not a big mistake, but it should be pluralized. And Elokim esna kasam, right? Hashem, or Elokim, God heard their cries. Right, Ves Yaakov V'yireh es, and here as you work out the words, right, es, and then you can work out this is soin, right, even though don't really only have a tzadi mostly here, but that's the word soin, and royeh, shepherd, and Moshe, so Moshe was a shepherd of sheep, V'yavo, and the famous line, Eish mitoich hasneh, there's a fire in the bush, and now we're gonna have Moshe, and it should be Asura, right, with the Vav, which is not here. However, with the vowels, if you put, right, the three dots over here, many times you don't have the Vav written with the word Asura. You just know it's Asura. Anyway, in the regular Chumash, it should have the Vav with Asura. Here, they did not. They might have presumably pronounced it the exact same way. Asura na, right, so Moshe... Well, Asura, turn na, please, and it's V'yomer Moshe. So Moshe is saying this, V'yomer Moshe, Asura na, right? He's almost saying it like to himself. He sees a fire. Maybe I'll turn. Okay, now here it's a little tricky. It's so lost just from wear and tear. But you can see Eile, right? You get the Lamed, that's a Hey, and maybe an Aleph, right? That's very hard to read. But here you have Nefesh, that's pretty easy to read. And V'yosef. And that's also pretty easy. The Samech from Sneh, you can see it's this very interesting letter here. And now, as you work backwards, you just try and find different words like Dan, and then you're going to have V'naftali, right? So this is the very first chapter of Exodus, and it's Eile Shmais, right? So now that you know that it's, right, the first chapter, so now you can kind of see the Shin, and yeah, maybe a Mem, and it's obvious, I wouldn't say obvious, it's presumably what's written here, but it's very hard to read. So it's presumably correct, but I wouldn't stake my reputation on it. Now here's, once again, I wouldn't say very, somewhat hard to read compared to some of the other examples. Harem es matecha, right? Lift your staff. V'noite es, right? And it's going to then scribble out, right? Just because it's going to be very hard to read over there. And then we're going to have Yisrael. Now, we only have the Lamed, I think, from Yisrael. B'toich hayam b'yavasha v'ani, right? So to go in the water on the dry part, v'ani, right? Achreihem v'echte b'paroi, right? I'll harden Paro's heart. Now, the Fei here is gone, but presumably it's there. It's just... lost just from wear and tear. Ubechoil, right? So it's very hard to read these parts. And Berichboy with his chariot. So this is talking about the splitting of the sea. And Paro is going to be hardened his heart to go in. Now, we don't have Mitzrayim here. However, with Ksav Ivri, it's one of these funny things where words are not always put together. What do I mean? Because there's usually like a period or a dot. Although it's hard to see in this part of the Ksav, although you can see them in a few spots. So since there's this period, I think as far as the Dead Sea Scrolls go, I don't know about other places, but they were not concerned about breaking up a word, just putting Yud Mem over here and then putting the Meitzar maybe over here, or maybe it's cut off. They had no compunction against that. Why? Well, because at the end of the day, I know that this is not the word Yam because there's no period right before. So it allowed them to kind of break up words in a funny way. So as much as we don't have the Meitzar here, it's presumably there in the missing spot. Ki ani Hashem, right? So once again, you're missing the Yud K Vav. Well, we do have the Hey over here, but we're missing the Vav. I probably just wrote the dashes, so we're not writing Hashem's name. Bechabti, right, when I strengthened. Vayisa malach, right, malach, sorry, and the angel traveled. Hoylech lefneihem, right, vayisa modha anan, right, we're missing the word anan, right, it's ripped out in the center. We're missing a lot of words, I guess. But the cloud of, I don't know, the cloud, right, there was a pillar of fire and a pillar of a cloud, right, that would go, and this is talking about where it went behind them to protect them, right, between the Machane Mitzrayim, between the camp of the Mitzrayim and the Machane Yisrael, the camp of the Jews. You know, everything checks out. It's the exact same. Now, this is interesting over here. There was a correction made to this part, even though I just told you it all checks out. Well, it looks like it was crossed out, meaning someone corrected it and then crossed it out because they corrected the correction. I don't think that's so common in the Dead Sea Scrolls, interestingly enough, so I'm not entirely sure what they thought was going on. Looks like something with a lamed they wanted to put. I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, someone made a mistake and it was corrected. And so that's really important to know, is that whether, presumably that correction was made later on, right? Because if it was made right away, well, you could presumably put it in. Now, maybe they never made corrections. They always made the corrections at the top. So maybe it was made right away and right after they had written the next word. But anyway, someone went back and corrected it just by scratching it out. It's just, I don't know, it's just an interesting thing to see. Okay, so this is Parashas Chava, V'yal Misham Beersheva, Avicha, Al Tira, right, Hashem, this is Hashem's name. Here I put kufs instead of dashes, interestingly enough. V'yet, Upi Choyel, right, this is talking about Avram Avinu, presumably that he moved from Beersheva or Pichel. I'm trying to remember who that was exactly. Anyway, you can look it up in Bereshis. It's interesting, I said 2022. Bereshis Chavav Chav Beis. I don't know which one was correct now. I'd have to look it up. That's going to change certainly who you think is talking about. But Bereshis Chavav is 26:22, and in the English I wrote 22:26. I'd probably trust the Hebrew 26:22 more likely because I wrote that first. But anyway, when I looked it up, it was correct. So we're going to look at some of these scripts right here. We'll focus on the top left one, right? That's this one. And this is Shmois Beis Hey, right? So we saw the second chapter of Shmois before. And here we have Vitira. It should be Vitira U. Right, so once again, interestingly enough, the plural and the singular kind of mistake here, which is interesting. I don't know. V'tachmalav bas paroi. I believe it's not supposed to say bas paro here. That's an extra thing. Now, it is talking about bas paro. So, you know, but it was already mentioned, and in Chumash it's not mentioned again. I believe this the Sumerian Pentateuch also puts bas paro, to be fair. And it should be vetinak. Not Vetinaka, that she nursed the child Moses, or sorry, Vetinak Lacha as a Yeled, that she's gonna get a nurse maiden for her. I don't know exactly, but that's what it's talking about. And V'toimar, right? This is one of those common mistakes where an extra vav might be put in where it's not really supposed to be, and you get to see it over here. The person who wrote this clearly likes to put in the extra vavs, right? V'yomer, right? Vav, yud, and then an extra vav here for v'yomer. Most places in Chumash, in fact, I think of nowhere in Chumash where there's this extra vav by v'yomer. Maybe a taimar, I don't know. I don't remember ever seeing that either. But this Sefer seems to like to put it in. He puts it in everywhere. So this is not a one-off. And not only does he put it in for V'taimer, V'yoimar, but he also puts it in Elokim, right? Which never happens. So these Vavs, the way I look at it, in a way, is to help you pronounce it. Maybe the Sefer put it in intentionally to make it easier, right? Maybe this is not a regular Chumash that's going to be used in a shul, but you know, like for example, nowadays when you have the book, the Torah, right at home, it puts in all the vowels and all these extra things to help you read it. Well, back then, if you wanted a Chumash and you wanted to make it a little bit easier to read, maybe you would do the same thing, right? It doesn't change the meaning at all. Now, maybe you can't put this to lane from, I don't know, I'd have to look up the halacha exactly, but it certainly wouldn't be good, that's for sure. It's probably a machlekes paiskim. The Rambam would probably actually hold it as might be okay. But which is actually interesting when you think about the fact that he would have no problem with possibly no problem with a Sefer Torah, at least b'diavad, doing this, because he holds that the reading of the Sefer Torah in shul can be done from memory, in fact, even if there's a missing word, at least from my memory anyway, from the sugya. Okay, but you see, this cipher puts an extra vav, so it's really not a big deal in my opinion. It's obviously wrong. However, that's just the way the cipher wrote it. Now, here's an interesting mistake, actually. V'yomer Elokim oid. It should be V'yomer oid Elokim. And here I put the fact that the Masoretic text is the same as the Septuagint, right? They both put oid Elokim instead. And here we have presumably Elokei Avraham, right? We just have Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, right? Here it says Elokei Yitzchak with a shin, with a sin, right? Elokei Yitzchak. Instead of a tzadi. That's very, very odd. It's hard to understand how this cipher made that mistake. Maybe he was doing it from hearing, right? That could also explain V'yomer Elokim oid. It also might explain why he puts these extra vavs in, because that's what he's hearing, right? He's not doing it from looking at another sefer. Still, it's odd that there's the word Yitzchak with a sin. That's very, very rare. I don't know. I'd have to look up if it happens really in Chumash at all. I think it might happen once, but in Tanakh. So it's a very odd mistake, to say the least. And so what's really going on here is you have to wonder who is the author over here that's making this mistake, right? It's such a basic thing that Yitzchak is spelled with a tzadi. So how did you do that? Is this dealing with someone who doesn't really know how to read and write? Do they... Like, what's going on here exactly? And I think this is a very telltale sign. Either you have to say they're doing it by ear, but even then, right, how did you make this mistake? Or they're going fast, or they're not checking, they're not paying attention, they're doing so many of these, right? Like, this is a very, very, very odd mistake. You knew exactly what had to be written, but you wrote the wrong word. Now, at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if Sofer, even nowadays, might make this mistake even while they're looking at a Chumash. Why? Like I said, you're doing so much, and it's, I don't want to say mind-numbing, but you're copying letter by letter. You're not like writing your own text and thinking about what you're writing, and you're trying to make it exact. So you can see how it can wear on you if you're doing it all day, which maybe that's what they were doing. I have no idea. But this, I think, personally is a telltale sign of not just a bad cipher, but someone who's maybe overworked or whatever you want to say. I'm not entirely sure. But it's something to note about the Dead Sea Scrolls, that kind of mistake. Whoops, sorry. I just went back. So yeah, here's an interesting one. I assume this is Vizikne. It should be B'nai Yisrael, right? And I guess I put this is like the Septuagint to put B'nai Yisrael, even though it should be Yisrael. And then it says Ki'im B'yad. I believe this says Chazaka, right? That I'm going to take them out with a strong hand, right? That's Hashem speaking about taking out the Jewish people. And this is not like the Septuagint. This is a very odd mistake. It should say Veloy B'yad Chazaka, right? That I'm not gonna take them out until I use a yad chazaka. So I think that the idea of the pasuk is presumably the same. So now how do you make this mistake? This does not sound like a hearing mistake, like Yitzchak or sorry, just Yitzchak. So how do you make this mistake? It's very odd. Maybe they heard it and they were falling behind and now they're filling in what they thought or understood. I'm not entirely sure. This is a very tricky one. Maybe they're doing this from memory. It wouldn't really explain Yitzhak then, right? So how do you explain both of these mistakes? Well, I mean, one easy explanation is this person was not a great, I feel bad saying it, but they were not a perfect cipher, or they were translating something and maybe Yitzhak was a phonetic translation. It's very hard for me to understand what is going on here, that this cipher made, I suppose, inconsequential mistakes, right? Like Yitzchak, who cares? You know what the word is. It's an obvious mistake. Doesn't really matter. Putting in the vavs, not a big deal. Vetinak or vetinaka, right? That's not a big deal. You know what we're talking about. We're talking about someone to nurse. And veloy biyad and ki'im biyad, okay. You know, it's they're trying to say the same thing, that Hashem's not going to take them out except biyad chazaka. But how did you go from that, right? How did you make this mistake? So and including Basparo more than once, right? Is this a thing from memory? Is that what's going on here? Are these the types of mistakes that someone's making from memory? And that would also explain, by the way, the extra vavs as well, just like hearing. Right? You know it says, right, v'yomer or v'taymar. Okay, you don't remember exactly the extra vavs. Although, like I said, it's very odd to put these extra vavs in unless it was done intentionally. I don't know. It's worth thinking about. If you have any thoughts, let me know. And now it says Yaakov Avihem, right? So this is talking about Shmois. This is the beginning of Shmois. And here it adds Yosef in the list, which it should not. And it says Chamesh Veshivim Nefesh, 570 souls. Now here it says V'yamas, and it died. And presumably we're going to be talking about... Oh, V'yamas is a later pasuk. It should actually say, and Yosef was already in Mitzrayim. However, my guess is the fact that it already mentioned Yosef in the list, so you can't say, and Yosef was in Mitzrayim now, because he was already in the list. What, are you going to add him again? So, because they put Yosef in the list, so then they're not going to mention that he died, right? So this, I would say, in a way, is riddled with small mistakes. Nothing consequential once again, right? Yaakov Avihem, he of course was their father, but it's not supposed to be there. Yosef was in Egypt, but he's not in the list. It mentions that he died, not that he died, but that he was already in Mitzrayim when they came down. And then it'll continue V'yamas, it'll get back on the tracks. Now, what's interesting is Chamish v'shivim nefesh. We spoke about this once before, 75 people. Last time it says shivim v'chamish nefesh, which I think is a much, much more common way of writing Hebrew numbers, to say 70 and 5. I will have to look up, but certainly it doesn't match the other Dead Sea Scrolls, right? The other ones said shivim v'chamish nefesh, and this says chamish v'shivim nefesh. Once again, is this a memory issue? Is this a hearing issue? What is going on? I would argue this seems more like a memory problem, right? That you put Yosef in the list. It's hard to mishear that. And Avihem, yeah, you didn't hear that word, but you added it from your memory because we're talking about Yaakov, their father. So this seems to be someone writing, I think, from memory. Of course, they get the vavs for viz, right? Zvulun, correct. I don't know what I guess. Okay, I don't know. I made a note that they got the vavs correct, whatever that meant. Maybe because Zvulun doesn't have a vav, and the other one's like, this is going to be Yisachar. Maybe he would have I don't know exactly. Okay, we'll leave that. Right, so it should be Yaakov Ish Ubeitoi. Oh, it should say Ubinyamin. Sorry, and you can say Ubinyamin, so that vav is correct. It's good when I sometimes go through my own notes later on. Anyway, this is the beginning of Shmois. It's pretty much correct with lots of correct in terms of meaning, but certainly has quite a few mistakes. Okay, Shmois Beis, this is the same chapter as before, right? The second chapter, not the last slide, but earlier. V'yivakesh laharag es Moshe, right? He wanted to kill Moshe. V'yira Moshe. Now, what is this word? Ma'oid? But spelt wrong. It's spelled with an aleph, not an ayin. Like, what? This is very odd, right? Moshe was exceedingly scared, or maybe. I'm not entirely sure what this word is. Also, there's like a lamed here. V'yomer loy, maybe? Like, you know, what? Ule, also over here, that it says, ule, I don't, you know what, it's hard to read. Ule shoifet aleinu. Right, so I see. So we're talking about where Moses goes out and sees the two people fighting, and he says to him, Ma shemecha, right, what's your name? Leish. All right, like what? Sorry. V'yomer loy mi samcha leish, who placed you? I apologize. As a person, as a leader, right? Ula shayfet aleinu, and to be like our judge, but it shouldn't be ula shayfet. That's the. I think that's the problem. So the person's adding these extra lameds. Hali harageni, right? So this yod is extra. Once again, it's just a vowelized thing. That's fine, not a big deal. And obviously, everything from here means the same, although this one was a very weird word. It's hard, and that's the other problem. Once again, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's hard sometimes to read them just because they're in bad shape. But certainly, there's some extra lameds, v'yomer loy or v'yomer le. I don't know. It's hard to read what this is. Just guessing it's loy, right? V'yomer loy, he said to him. It's obviously who's speaking to it, right? It's not going to change anything. Okay, Shmais, this is the first chapter. V'yomer, I don't know what these vavs are. I see. Sorry, that's not a vav. This is a hey. So it's so hard to read something. V'toimarna, probably, right? So v'toimarna, the vav, saf, and then an extra vav here. Once again, extra vavs. V'toimarna meyaladois, right? It's talking about the midwives to paroi, right? And then it says alehena, right? So it's the extra yud here once again. Extra vav I'm pointing out now. So pronunciation, it's the same, but it should be alehen, not aleno, right? Just like v'toimarna, it's incorrect. Although I should say that the v'toimarna, I believe it is pronounced the same way. It's incorrect with the extra hey. You don't need that extra hey. It's going to be vowelized as v'toimarna. That's why I said the pronunciation is the same, right? That's very important. But it's not the pronunciation here. Here it should be alehen, not aleno. So why did they extra? Maybe once they added this extra hey, they added this extra hey, right? So you get yourself into trouble. Once you make a mistake, it's very easy to make more mistakes. Anyway, Shmois hey. What's going on here? So it should say, I don't know, V'yidabru el ha'am. Let's see. Oh, it should be V'yoimru el ha'am, that he said, and then he said. They're both the same words as said. But usually the Mefarshim, the rabbis explain that, at least Orach Chaim HaKadosh will usually explain how the word daber is more of a harsh word. V'yoimer is more soft way of speaking. And here he says, L'koishesh kash leteven, there's no space here. Or if there is, it's very minute, right? So you can see the space between these two words, but not between here. So they've gotten everything right, except just in their speed, they haven't put a space. So once again, I would argue, these people seem to be writing very, very, very fast. Now, I'm not entirely sure what this word is. Mebe oirev, mebe erev, mebe... It's hard for me to read. I don't think it's supposed to be there at all. It should be tiru mimenu ki, but that doesn't look like the word here. And of course, once again, it's there's a hole right beside it, so it makes it so hard to figure out, did this continue here? Is it like quoting something else in the middle of the pasuk? What's going on here? And it says kitmoil shilshayim, like yesterday and the day before. But it shouldn't say, kitmol shil shaim. It should just say tomorrow shil shaim, not like yesterday and the day before, or when yesterday the day before. It should just say tomorrow yesterday and the day before. Okay, Shmois Yud Gimel. So here we have El Bnei Yisrael, right? It should say Le Bnei Yisrael. And this is going to be the Song of the Sea, right? Az Yashir Moshe. Now, it should be Tiva'emu V'tita'emu. Instead, it says Tiva'em V'tita'am, right? So, I don't know. Once again, it's that singular plural issue, except, no, this goes with it, right? They're putting it into singular, even though it should be plural. I don't know. Ammoni, I don't know. It's hard for me to read exactly what's going on here. It's obviously a small mistake. And you can see that there was a mistake over here that was corrected. And I went through it more carefully before to know that correction was correct, I suppose. Right? Oh, good. I put it in. So it should say, as atzmois Yosef imoy, right? So we see as something imoy. And so here we have the word Yosef, I suppose. Or maybe over here it's Yosef and atzmois. I don't know. It's hard for me to read exactly what was going on. But pretty much, once again, correct. Except for the plural over here, Levnei Yisrael instead of El Bnei Yisrael, which is the same idea. And this word, oh, I remember. Okay, so funny. This is actually a really interesting mistake. I'm happy we went back. Now, it's hard for me to read this, and so funny. I didn't want to write, usually people say Amonoi instead of Hashem's name, right? Aleph Dalid. And then Nun Yud. Instead, they put a mem sometimes when they're speaking. That's a whole long story. But here it says Yud K Vav K. It says Hashem's four-letter name in the Song of the Sea. But it should say, I believe, not the way it's written, but the way it sounded, right? The way it's read as with like Amonoi, except instead of the M, it's a D. So once again, this is actually almost like a verbal mistake, right? Someone heard the word and they wrote it the wrong way. They just assumed it's the four-letter name of Hashem. That's an interesting one. Or once again, maybe from memory, they're remembering how to say it. Okay, this one was correct. This is Makos B'chayres. Now this, Yisrael, I felt that it should be Mitzrayim. Whoops, sorry about that. And that was a mistake. However, I later on, I think, looked at it, and no, it was actually correct, that it was Yisrael. So it's very easy, that's my memory anyway, it's very easy that these mistakes happen or don't happen, and even when I'm looking at it more than once and matching everything up, even I made a mistake, once again, because there's these jumps here, and it's hard to read exactly what's going on, so you're assuming the words, and yeah, I can read that letter, and that's a lamed, so there should be a lamed here, and yeah, I can make sure that there's a lamed there, and so it's very easy for me sometimes to, make a mistake. Oh, it shouldn't be Yisrael, it should be Mitzrayim, and no, it was supposed to be Yisrael. What am I talking about? So that was actually interesting for me to catch. My correction, right, was incorrect. And this is lechol, I did make a note, lechol b'nei Yisrael, right? So yes, it is supposed to be b'nei Yisrael. This correction of mine was a mistake, and I just confused it with something else. So it's just, very interesting how I can do that type of thing. Now we see the word hasfardim, right? The frogs, the plague of the frogs. So that's a very easy one to make, and we see there's a correction here. What's this correction? Presumably, this is the word paro. And it's paro, v'yetze Moshe v'Aaron, me'im paro, right? That was me'im, and then they missed the word paro, and they wrote v'yitzhak Moshe, right? And Moshe called out. Now, of course, this is a clear mistake, right? How could you ever write this? It just says that they went out me'im from who? From who? And then you just screamed. So me'im paro, this was a mistake. But once again, these Seifrim, overworked or it's hard to say exactly what's going on. I would personally think this is an overworked issue, or they just, like I did, skipped a word when they looked at a different scroll or something, like they'd lost their spot. Maybe they went to lunch. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. But this is, once again, one of those big... Now, it was caught. And by the way, look, and we're going to see this many times where the correction is faded. So how many times do you think that there were corrections that we should be able to see on the other parchment, and they're gone now, right? Maybe they got a little bit more worn off. Maybe the corrections are done in different ink. That's interesting. Why is that? But obviously some sort of issue. I don't know exactly what's going on. But otherwise, this is correct, at least with the correction. This is Exodus 10. Isn't it amazing that with only so few letters, you can see Ososai, right? That's a correction. Right, Laman Shasai Ososai, in order to put my signs, I suppose. Here, Avadav Laman Shasai Ososai, right? So here's the problem, is that this does not look like this is Ososai. This does not look like the word Shasai. This does look like the word Ella. But of course, you know what could be? It could be that there's more missing up here that's being added in. That's why when you have a ripped piece, it's so hard to know what's going on. But ve'is lev avdav, that's correct. And I had a problem, this looks like a ration of vav, what's going on here? But like I said, it's always hard to tell what's going on because there's so much missing. This whole thing, I had to go through bit by bit to figure out that this is all correct. And except, I suppose it should say tenasun. Instead it says tenasu. I suppose that's a similar idea. Now, this is talking about when there was no water on the exit of Egypt, right? The rock was hit, and there was a war with Amalek afterwards. And by the way, this tenasu, this vav, maybe that's a nun, right? A vav just continues a little bit longer. So maybe it was the same thing, and they're just missing that extra vav, which we've seen many times happen. Many times happen where there's an extra vav, or they remove a vav, whatever it might be. So this might not even be any mistake, but the rest of it is, perfect. Okay, Shmois Yud Gimel Tez Zayin, and you can see very famously Toita Fos, right? An extra vav here, however, pronounced the exact same, Toita Fos, talking about the tefillin. Now, what's going on here? Uvenei Yisrael. I guess I had a problem. Oh, that maybe it looks like Az Yashir Moshe Uvenei Yisrael, right? Is that how you read it? Now, the problem with that is we're talking about Yod Gimel, and Az Yashir Moshe is much later. So how did you, in such a short time, skip here? I don't know. Is this a really long scroll? And yeah, that's what happened? Or is there a mistake? Or is it, for example, the Parsha of Shema, right, which mentions Totafos? And now the song of Az Yashir. So maybe it's just, this is like a prayer scroll. It's not actually Chumash. And because it's such a small thing, you think it's Chumash, but it's not. It's a quote from Chumash. Or is this a different verse, which does make sense in context, right? In the distance, in the psukim, is Chamushim Alu Uvenei Yisrael. Now, what's the problem here? Is only this hey. This hey doesn't quite look like Alu, but maybe it's just a mistake. Allah, right? And once again, that mistake of plural to singular. Is that what's going on here? And so in such a small piece, it's so hard to know what's going on. If we had more of the verse, then at least we could narrow down, is this Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Israel? Or is this Chamishim Allah Uvnei Israel? Or Alu Uvnei Israel, right? But as is with the Dead Sea Scrolls, you miss just a little bit too much. And it is, I don't know, it's just frustrating. Okay, so this is Shmos Yud Gimel, right? 13:13. Moshe El Ha'am Zachair. So, by the way, this is a very different ksav as far as I can tell from anything we've seen, and maybe anything we will see. Is this just a unique sofer, came for a day, or the only thing we have left from him? It's hard to know. And once again, this is a very hard script, right? Moshe El Ha'am, right? There's no space here. There's spaces here. I don't know why they do this. I really don't know. Yatsatem, so it says mimitz. It should be. It says Yasasam Eretz Mitzrayim, and then I don't know what are these words here. Key, right? Like this key. But it says Yasasa. It should be Yasasa Mimitzrayim mi Beis Avadim Ki bechayzek Yad. Right. So this could be Ki be. Right. That's possible. Hard to read. But once again, this cipher, once again, I feel bad, is not quite perfect. And this is Elokim, but I believe it should be Hashem. And El Eretz Knan, that's correct. Now here we have Vachiti, and it should be Vachiti, V'ha'amoiri, V'achivi, V'yavuzi, Asher. Instead, we have Achiti, right? So the Hittites. Now this presumably is Vehachivi, and then we have Vehamoiri. So these two words were switched. Once again, if you're doing this from memory, it makes a lot of sense here. And this looks like Vehayavusi, even though I personally think it's not written well, and this might even look like a lamed a little bit, but it looks like they just, maybe it's a rip, or maybe it's just they streaked the pen. Otherwise, it's Hayavusi. Asher, right? So that reads pretty well. But once again, there is this mistake. And yes, this Chivi and Emori should be switched. So anything important here? Like, was this a big deal? No. And by the way, the only reason why I mentioned this is a correction, because I felt like it looked a little different than the rest of the handwriting. I don't know, the whole handwriting doesn't look perfect. Now, there is this mistake, right? V'yatzasam eretz Mitzrayim, instead of Mitzrayim Beis Avadim. It means the same thing, obviously. It's not going to change anything in Pashup Pshat, the simple meaning of the verses here. But it's important to know that this is probably one of the bigger mistakes, I would say, right, that we've seen, at least in part 2, especially Hashem and Elokim, this cipher, which luckily I guess we won't see much of because I don't recognize the handwriting so much. Once again, if you're doing it from memory, this makes a lot of sense to make these kinds of errors. So few words, and yet they're correct, and you can figure out Shmos Yud Daled, right, Al Toicha Yam. Right, they went in to the sea, Eish va'anan, right, the fire and the cloud, the pillar, that's what we're talking about. This is the 6th chapter of Exodus, and here it says Oisam with the Vav. It shouldn't, but it does. Asher Garuba, okay. Interesting. Now, here's a really interesting scroll. I think this one is so fascinating. If you have any clue what happened, you let me know. So first of all, what's going on here with this letter? Very odd. I don't know what letter this is in Hebrew. Maybe you'll turn it around, you'll play with it, and figure out what's going on here. But v'yiriya ha'achas, right, there was one, I don't know, the curtain's not the right word, one hide, I guess. And this is, if you want to look it up, it's talking about the Mishkan. It's in Shmois Chavav Beis 26, right? There's one of these things. Arba ba'ama, there should be ba'ama. And you can see the arba is like kind of cut off. It's like, it's hard to describe. It's almost like they were writing on a page and then, or 2 pages, and it just gets kind of cut off here. It's like almost like a nice line. I'm not entirely sure. But here, notice this here, this cut off as well. What are these little dots here? And I had intuition, a very funny intuition. So look at this. I just tried to animate it. Isn't it funny how those dots kind of line up with the tops of these? So what was going on here? Was this a scroll that was folded when it was written and it got smudged and therefore they stopped writing because they kind of ruined their scroll and they just kind of cut it out? But at the same time, as much as I want to say that, it looks like, you know, they were writing over here, and once again, it looks like something was on top of the paper, so when they were writing, it didn't get written on, if that makes sense, right? But amma, right, the hay looks a little bit short, not crazy short, but where's the bottom part? And what's this dot over here? I don't know. And what's this letter over here? Like, you tell me what you think. I find it very funny, though, that these top dots really do match up with the tops over here. I'm not entirely sure what to think. Oh, I just wrote Ksav Agabe Ksav. Someone's writing on top of this, right? So maybe they had another parchment on top and that they were writing and copying it and they ruined it or did something and they just stopped writing. Okay, this is Mipnei Ha'arov, right? Because of the wild animals, it should be just the dot, not the extra vav. Shmois Ches, Beisa, Paro, right? The house of Paro. And you just pretty much work back and you can work out all the words. Hineni, Beis Mitzrayim, Hahu, Ace, him, it, I don't know. Kiani Hashem, right? I am God, says it, right? That's Hashem speaking, obviously. Lamachar Yeh Ha'ois, right? We just have the hey, but it could continue. Ha'ois, the sign. This is all correct, perfect. And once again, sometimes you just have to work backwards. You find the one word you can read or whatever it is, and then you work outward and figure out exactly which psukim, which verses these are. And so this seems Paro LaMoshe LaAaron, right? So speaking Paro to Moshe and Aaron, Shleishes Yamim, right? And then you have the Yud Mem once again. We're missing the beginning, but once again, no problem because it's Ksav Ivri. You have to get used to the fact that they're willing to interrupt words, no problem. And once again, you have Yam over here. And presumably this Shmois Yod Chav Beis. Now, the problem here is that it should be, assuming maybe that this is what I think it is. Once again, with so few words, it's sometimes hard to know. But it should be Vayikra Paro, right? So the word Vayikra is up here somewhere, right? Ripped off. Paro, it shouldn't be Le Moshe, it should be El Moshe. And it should be Vayomer, not Ula Aharon. However, there is another verse a little bit before where it's Paro Likroi LaMoshe Ula Aharon, where it does say Ula Aharon, and there it says Vayikra, but or Likroi, I suppose. It's the same word to call. But there it's Paro Likroi LaMoshe Ula Aharon, and here it's Vayikra Paro LaMoshe Ula Aharon. So if you're doing it from memory, very easy to make these kinds of mistakes, in my humble estimation. Now, this should be Shleishes, Yamim, perfect. So, a small mistake, once again, because you're mentioning Aaron when you shouldn't be. But, like I said, is it the end of the world? No, it's not going to change anything, and yet, it's important because we understand now how these Seifrim are making mistakes, right? They're quoting or using other psukim. So this is how the parchment looked before, very nice, but the black and white makes it a little bit easier for me to read. So this is Hashem. Now I'm writing just Hashem as Hashem, just hey with a chipchik. I think that's probably the better way of doing it. I don't know why I did it the other way before, but Hashem Daber El Paroi, right? So Melech Mitzrayim, And then you can work yourself way back. Hashem el Moshe lemor, ani Hashem, right? So Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, I am God. Go speak to Paro, the king of Egypt. Asher ani doiber alecha, right? Anything that I'm going to tell you to tell him. V'yomer Moshe lifnei Hashem, right? Aros v'sayim, that I'm, I don't know, my lips are covered over. Aral, I guess, is covered over, according to Rashi. Sfasaim. Now, you can't see the shin here, once again. Presumably erased out. Ve'ich yishma, right? So you can see yishma, right? The letter yud and the letter shin. But here we're missing the mem ayin. Presumably just smudged out. It's just hard for me to read. A lie paroi. How is Paro going to hear me? Ve'yomer. It's an extra vav here. We're used to that. El Moshe ra nasasicha Elokim laparo. Right? I'm going to make you a leader, let's say, or that doesn't really mean God, but you'll be the leader to Paro. Va'aroin. Extra vav. Achicha, your brother yiyeh. Your Navi, right? He'll be the one who says over what you're supposed to say. Tadaber es kol asher itzavecha, right? You're going to say everything I commanded you. And everything is very hard to read in these letters, right? You can see it's very faded out. Yedaber, and then just going through it. Kshay lev paro, I'll harden Paro's heart. And if we work our way upwards instead of down, Mimitzrayim hu Moshe va'Aaron, extra vav for Aaron, v'yeh b'yoyim diber, right? So this is the 6th chapter of Exodus. You can look it up if you'd like. Oh, and we missed a spot here. El Moshe be'eretz Mitzrayim. So it's very good. And velo yishma, right? And he won't hear. It's a savosai, right? So this is perfect. Okay, Shmais Zayin, Yudalid, Paro b'boiker vehinehu. Now this is, I wouldn't say a big problem, but it's a problem. So it's talking about where Paro is in the morning, vehine, and it should not be vahu. It should be not vehine. It should just be hine yoitze, that he's going out, right, in the morning. Now, the truth is, I assume this reads as who, but you can see how smudged this is. Who and the word yotze could be very similar. So the letter hey is like this in the Ksav Ashuri. And what's the yud? Just an extra little bit over here. Right? And like this is a yud, okay? This is a yud right over here, and this is a hey. You see how similar those are? This goes down a little bit, and this one goes right a little bit. So is this just the sofer making a mistake, and he wrote a hey instead of a yud, right? You could imagine how easy it is. And maybe it's hutza, right? Not who. I'm just guessing. There's no aleph here for me to guess that. I just, hey, vav, usually that's the word who. But maybe they wrote hutza, and it should be yotze. And there's an extra vav here. Okay, it's just like there's an extra vav here. Now this one is pronounced the same way. So I'm not bothered by this. This extra vav is not pronounced the same way. It should just be hine. So that's an interesting mistake. And once again, Yedaber Hashem, I believe it should be V'yomer Hashem, right? So we've seen this mistake before. It's the same exact meaning pretty much. But if you're doing it from memory, it's very easy to make this mistake. And Svas HaYaor Vehamate, right, the edge of the Nile, let's say, or the river, Vehamate, right, we're just missing the word mate because of the rip. So, at the end of the day, this is pretty much, once again, no problem, the exact same idea that we've been talking about before, where these mistakes make a lot of sense. Now, one of the beautiful things to keep in mind is, when you think about how many times this could happen, and yet it only happens, I think, like once or twice, that they mix up V'yedaber and V'yomer. Now, this is what I'm always talking about, that when you have these mistakes near, right, V'hine and Hu, or whatever it is, right, if we just had the extra letters, I would be able to tell you, yes, it's V'hine Hu, because there's an aleph, or it's V'hine Hutza, and they just wrote a hey, but it should have been a yud, and maybe, in fact, it really is a yud, and this got scratched out. It's always so annoying when these mistakes happen, and there always seems to be happening near a rip. Maybe that's intentional. I have no idea. They'll let me know. Okay, Shmais Tes Vav, the 9th chapter of Shmais. B'boiker b'tzoyin davar kaved, mikne Mitzrayim v'loyomus. Right, it's talking about Dever, right, the plague of on the animals. Be'eretz v'yas Hashem, and Hashem did. V'hine loy meis memikne. Now, it shouldn't say, it says B'nai Yisrael, it should just say Yisrael. We've seen this mistake before sometimes, where Yisrael is mentioned B'nai Yisrael instead of just Yisrael. and it's Moshe, presumably, right? I can't see the word Moshe, but we have the hey at least. Vel Aharon, an extra vav. Now here, we're going to get into a big kerfuffle here. What in the world is going on? And once again, it's so lightly written, it's hard to read what's going on. Now, if you would ask me, well, first of all, what it's supposed to say is Moshe vel Aharon kachu lachem, right? Malei chafnechem. Okay, so I think this word is chafnechem. And I think I can see a mem here and a lamed here. I'm just going to guess that's an aleph because that's almost impossible to read. So what are all these extra words here? What happened to the word chu? What's going on? Okay, I have a theory. I have a very simple theory that it's Moshe vel Aharon, and then they wrote lachem. They missed the word chu. And maybe they started to write another word, I don't know. And then they decided, now it's very hard to read this letter here. It doesn't quite look like a kuf, to be fair, but this could very easily be a ches. And this could very easily be a vav. So maybe, just maybe, they wrote the word lachem, they missed a word, and instead of writing it on top, no, they'll just correct themselves, and they'll just continue, they'll rewrite it, right? Elaroin lachem, kru lachem, right? You can kind of see the lachem again, malei chafnechem, and, they'll cross it out later, or they'll fix it up later, or they'll look it up later, or maybe they didn't even realize that they had made a mistake. They didn't even realize they wrote the word lachem here. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. That's the truth. I don't know what's going on, and it's so lightly written in the spot that went wrong. Why? Why is it like that? Oh, I suppose most of the scroll is a little bit hard to read. Le'ine paro v'haya avak al haaretz. Al haaretz, sorry, then there'll be like a dust on the ground, right? It's talking about the plague of boils, b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, and all of Egypt. So, I don't know. That seemed like a correct scroll, but with a minor mistake, maybe. Once again, very hard to read. Halechem asher ha'achalti, right? The bread that I've eaten. Mitzrayim, v'yomer, right? Ha'omer. And so if you want to get used to this script, you can see the mem is like a shin with an extra bit underneath. You get used to it. And you say there's an extra vav here, and we're talking about the man, hanach, right? So we're missing the vav hey, but once again, it's ripped out, but the rest of the word is correct. And this is shmois tesvav, so very good, very nice, very correct. And also tziva down here, actually. Look at that. Okay, al ken kara, so this is shmois tesvav, all correct. And this is talking about lehi lachem ba'amalek, to go to war with Amalek. Hasher yarim Moshe, when he raised his hands, Moshe, right? Yado, we have the word yado over here, and then we have Amalek v'yada v'yedei Moshe, right? So presumably when he raised his hands, they were winning. Moshe's hands were heavy, v'yasimu tachtav, right? Talking about Aaron putting underneath his hands, v'yashev aleya v'achroin, sorry, this should probably be v'aharon, Haron, yeah. Okay, I mistyped that. Not v'acharon, and Aharon, and Aaron. Echad umizeh, echad v'yu, yadav, right? So presumably we're talking about each one of them was on each side, and his hands would be to the skies. And we have Yehoshua making a presence here. Yehoshua, yeah, okay, good. Whoops, I don't know what happened there. Okay, one second. Yehoshua, Amalek, Vesamoy, Lefi, right? And now we get rid of here, and there's obviously a correction here. Maybe we'll come back to that. Ksuv Zoy Zichroin Besefer, Amches Zecher Amalek, Mitachas, right? We're missing the word Mitachas, but it's presumably there, right? To erase the name of Amalek, you're going to write this down in a Sefer, and you're going to erase the name of Amalek. And then we have Yikra Shmoi, and it just reads Nasi V'yomer Kiyad, but it should say V'yikra Shmoi Hashem Nisi. Hashem was, I don't know, Nisi. It's sometimes used as trouble, but Nisi, my banner, I guess, or my miracle. V'yomer Kiyad, and I don't remember the rest of the verse off by heart. But pretty much exactly correct, except for maybe V'yiyu. Okay. We've seen that before with the extra vav. Shmois Yud Zayin, if you want to look it up. V'yichabsu sim loisam, right? They washed their clothing. Yamim al tukshu, right? They didn't go close. Alois Bahar, we're talking about Har Sinai because they'll be Sakol, they'll be stoned or whatever it might be. Shmois Yud Tes, you can look it up, and here is Shofar, and it's hard to read, but Chazak, presumably, and Likras, right? So, yeah, very nice that everything is looking at least good on that one. Esrei Yeriois, so an extra Vav here, but that's the way it's pronounced, and we're missing the ayin, but that's okay. Now, here's going to be a very interesting problem. Lavad v'kafalta es, and then, that's not a problem, but here, what is this word? First of all, and we'll come back to that in a second. But then we have chamishim, and it says al. Now, here's the problem. We're talking about the Mishkan, and it should be chamishim leluois al. So what's going on here? And here we have al sfas, on the edge. Now, why does all of this matter? So if you want to look it up, Shmois Chavav, and we don't have any corrections here, as far as we can tell. Now, maybe the correction is just over here after the word al, or maybe it got erased, but also, what's this word, right? There's only, I shouldn't say there's only, it could be vasita chamishim, but doesn't read that way. There's a ches here, so vasita is not going to work. What about bechaveres? Could this be bechaveres? I personally think it's possible, right? This looks like a nun, but if it's missing something, that becomes a base, That's not a big deal. And the only problem is this letter's not going to look right. What happened here? Maybe they missed a letter. Okay. So what's more likely to me is that this word is the word nachoshes, and it's incorrect here. Now, nachoshes chamishim, right? This is chamishim over here. So nachoshes chamishim does appear in verse 11. But that is not this. This is verse 10. And the problem is we know this is al sfas, so that's verse 10. So how did you get the word nacheshes? Once again, from memory, right? It's chamishim, nacheshes chamishim, al, and already al is anyway incorrect. Now, it's not totally bad because you're just missing a word, lulois. Now, why are you missing the word lulois? Now it makes a little bit more sense. Because you wrote the word nacheshes chamishim, there's 50 brass, or, trying to remember what's nacheshes is copper, I believe. Okay, I'm not so good with materials sometimes, Hebrew names for materials. But Nacheshes Chamishim, they're talking about not the hooks, the lulois, or I suppose it is, but it's not saying Chamishim lulois, Chamishim hooks. Instead, it's the copper of Chamishim. So now you understand why we missed the lulois, because the Chamishim was already described by the word Nacheshes. But the word nacheshes was wrong. So really we only have, I would argue, one mistake, and that is to mention nacheshes chamishim, which is the next pasuk. And so the Sefer here got just a little bit mistaken. Maybe he was looking at the wrong thing. Maybe he was doing it from memory, right? All the same mistakes. But this time you could actually look at the wrong thing and make a mistake, because the word chamishim, that there's 50, comes up quite a few times in these few psukim. You can look it up for yourself if you'd like. And so you can imagine how that mistake can easily happen. But nevertheless, it is a genuine mistake, and we have to keep those mistakes in mind. Right? I'm not going to tell you that even though everything else was correct, I'm not going to tell you that whole thing was correct. No, it was a big mistake. Understandable, but still big. Asher etzava as oischa el b'nei, right? And to do as I've commanded you. Atzei shitim amasayim, right? I was going to translate the word shitim, but I think usually it's just translated as Shittite wood. Voisoi zahav tahor, right? Clean gold, meaning pure gold. Tavach saviv asisa, right? To make a tefach around it, and you shall do it. Zahav, it should be gold. Venatata hamizgeres tiena es habadim, right? So already now we're talking about one of the vessels. Shemais 25, you can look it up, but presumably a mizgeres is talking about the shulchan, if memory serves correctly, meaning the table, the golden table. Es habadim, the poles, right? Also going to be atzei shitim, covered in gold. Okay, now this says briche. Now we're missing most of the letters here, to be honest, but based off of everything else, it works out to be briche. So there's a ches and a yud, but it should be brichim. But atzei shitim, lakarshe sela, right? We can see lakarshe sela, the ribs of the Mishkan. I can't remember what this is. Yerach chatzim. Yama, the southern side. Vaha briach. So the pole that goes in the center. Sorry, it's sometimes hard in my mind to. I assume it's the one that goes in the center, but whatever. The briach, the pole that goes on the inside of the Mishkan that holds up the individual pillars, I guess. So there's poles that run along the side. Vesakrashim titzape, right? And so these pillars, you're gonna overlay them. No, I was gonna say inlay, overlay them. Vesapita, right? So it's the same word as titzape, like to overlay them. So brichim. Is this a phonetic mistake that you just misheard, right? It's still, I would argue it's still plural, briche. Maybe you just didn't understand how to pluralize it, maybe? I'm not entirely sure. But you can look it up. I don't know why I put this as a check mark, even though it's only one mem, Sophie. Maybe that's why. Otherwise, it's the same. Okay. Teimana, the south. Esrim, Tzapon, Ba'oirech, Kiloim, right? We're missing the Kuf Lamed, but that's just because it was ripped off. Chamishim, right? Once again, that 50. Lapeis Kedma, right to the side to the east. And Shloisha, this is correct. Shmais Chav Zayin, Tes. I'm not sure. Oh, okay. I was like, what are these arrows? I thought this was correct. Okay, good thing I left myself a note why I put those arrows. Why was this so easy for me to find? Because the current Torah and this version is so similar. I made a note for myself that, this might have been almost impossible. You just have one word, like one word. How can you find this? Wow, with just one or two words matching up? Yeah, because it's the exact same. So it's very easy to figure out what's going on. Okay, Nishma Habris and Yisrael V'Ke'etzem, right? Same thing, by the way, right? It's the exact same thing, only a few words, and yet I can figure out exactly where it is, Shmais Chav Daled, and that it's correct. Because it matches. It's a wonderful thing. Shmais Chav Tes, not that it really matters, by the way. But Es HaChelev, now that's what I thought this should say, because we have Es and Ha, but it's a Yud, not a Ches. So what's going on here? So I think this is Es HaYoiseres. I think that's what's going on. Now it should be the Es HaYoiseres, but maybe we're missing the Vav. It's ripped off, no problem. The problem is, once again, all we have is a Hey and maybe a Yud. So what's going on here? It's hard to tell. Okay, so this is verse 13, Esa Yoiseres, or Ve'esa Yoiseres. Usually, I think in this verse, it'll say Ve'esa Chelev, but it'll say Es Yoiser, or it won't say Es Yoiseres. I can't remember exactly how it's phrased over here, but it's not exactly Es Yoiseres over here. It does mention the Yoiseres or Yoiseres, but anyway, this from verse 13 is an exact match Ve'es Yoiseres. I think it's just Yoiseres in this part, in this part of the scroll, which is 9 psukim later. So once again, in a way, a mistake. On the other hand, a very understandable mistake, and a very hard mistake for me to really know, is it a mistake or not? Because once again, so much is ripped out. Okay, Asher Alehen, right? And then it's presumably here it's going to be who and a mem, right? We've seen the word who come up before. That was wrong, but here it's correct. And Vekikar and Echad, Vesamta Hakol, all, and you placed all of it on. Atem Tnupoi, right? And you'll give it here. Or that you are here. That you'll give it here. Shmois Chavtes, so this is correct. Lakachta min ha'ayil, that you'll take from the ram. Mekasa es hakerev, right, what's covering over the innards. Right, presumably it's talking about removing the fat that's covering the innards. Shmois lamed beis, also correct. Elokim, presumably that's what's being written here. It's hard to read. B'neichem, so it's your wives and your sons. Nizmei, so this is the Zayin, by the way, that we saw before. Nizmei, I think this is nose rings. V'yikach miyadam, and you'll take it from their hands. Anyway, it's correct. And Shmois lamed beis Zayin. Now, this is a very interesting mistake. I think this is similar to the mistake we saw before, where a word was repeated. Because it should say lech red ki. But I think that it's just they wrote the word raid twice. And maybe they wrote it badly, so they wrote it again. Right? Once again, so hard to know what is the mistake exactly, because everything is ripped around this mistake. And maybe that's why it's ripped. Maybe it was taken out of a scroll because they realized this part is wrong and they could fix it, which is suggested many times in the Gemara, that they would rip out a piece of a scroll and replace it to fix it. Okay, min haderech v'yishtachavu or v'yishtachu yishtachavu. Just put the question marks because this is ripped out. You can't see it, but the vav, very good. Yisrael, once again, this is missing, but Asher halucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. So very good, everything over there. V'yashkimu, I should say mimacharas, right? Which is presumably what it says, but it says mimocharas. Now the aleph, the kamatz over here is usually pronounced a little bit more like a o, like instead of a, o, but not an o. So it is a little bit odd to have this vav, and it almost sounds like someone's heard mimocharas almost and thought that there's supposed to be a vav here. I don't think I've ever seen a vav in such a word. This is a very odd mistake. And once again, this is, I would argue, a bad cipher, right? Because I don't want to say they don't speak Hebrew well. It's not like a Chumash problem. It's like if you added an extra U in color, where there's never like some, for example, color, C-O-L, people will spell it O-U-R. Okay, that's fine. But no one ever spells C-O-U-L-O anything, O-U-R or O-R. No one puts a U after that first O. Like, that's like such an odd thing. So if someone did that, you'd say like, okay, you don't really know English so well, maybe. They're supposed to, sometimes you put okay, kind of. So that's almost what the way I see this mistake. It's very, very odd. But once again, overworked or going quickly or whatever it might be. Okay, Vashasu, otherwise it's good. Yeah, and by the way, the word was correct. They just put an extra vav, which doesn't really make sense. And it would be read kind of the same because it's memocharas, not memocharas. But you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to describe exactly. Like, it's a big deal because you want it to be perfect, right? But it not a big deal at all. Okay, Yachal ki kaideshu. Ulabanav kechol asher tziva. You know what? We're going to stop here. We've been doing quite a bit, and we'll leave this for later on to analyze. Thank you so much for watching. I know this is going slow going. There's a lot of parchments here, a lot of scrolls here to go through. I appreciate the patience, and this is really only for those people who really want to read it inside and see every little single thing with the way I've read and learned and really worked on all of these scrolls. If that's what you're in for, perfect. Otherwise, you can subscribe and just wait for the summary version of all, I suppose, the more interesting pieces. I don't know. But thank you so much for watching either way.